All right, welcome back to the Daily Report. This is the marketplace tonight. We're going to be talking about the possible repercussions of the proposed finance bill. Of course, there are several clauses. We need to know what exactly is going to be happening in the world of manufacturing. A lot of people usually say that this pushes the gears of the economy. Now, looking at a few of the numbers here and, of course, some of the proposals that have been given and some of the things that we will be seeing by 1st of July, if this particular bill is passed as is, of course, would be the repeal of the relief on excise duty on raw materials, one of the things that a lot of manufacturers are against. And of course, the EIPL, which will affect construction, food product prices, and consumer goods production. Now, of course, this will have a lot of other effects on many other sectors. And of course, there would be the introduction, I beg your pardon, of the eco levy, which of course would increase all packaging costs by 100%. And a bar of soap, utensils and bathing soap the rise will be between 170 to 270 from the original prices. And this would also have an implication on import declaration fund, and there would be an increase of between 2.5% to 3.0%, which would reduce competitiveness, a 10% excise duty on plastic products, and the 10% excise duty on plastic products will affect basin costs, which will increase between 100 shillings to 200 shillings. These are things that you will be seeing from the 1st of July if some of these things are not going to be changed. A 25% excise duty on vegetable oil, which will increase the cost by 80%. Now, say for example, that the cost at this particular moment is around 200 shillings, that would mean that the cost would go up to 1,000 shillings. Some of the excise duty increases that we're also looking forward to seeing, or that we are really not looking forward to seeing, is the telephone and internet data changes from 15% to 20%, and the fees charged for money transfer by banks, money transfer agencies, and other financial service providers from 15% to 20%. This, of course, is something that a lot of institutions are trying to change. The fees charged for money transfers by telcos from 15% to 20%. Betting, gaming, prize competition, and lottery would go from 12.5% to 20%. This increase has been quite interesting, considering that this 12.5% was introduced about a year and a few months ago. And of course, products containing nicotine or nicotine substitutes will be increased, or will be having this cost from 1,595 shillings per kg to 2,000 shillings per kg, an increase of about 405 shillings. And of course, liquid nicotine for electronic cigarettes from 70 per milliliter to 100 per milliliter. Some of the things are beneficial, some of the things are bringing fear, some of the things are evoking a lot of reactions, and we will be hearing from the manufacturing sector. Of course, I have a very strong panel tonight. I would say so myself. I have the CEO of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, Anthony Mwangi, and I will be asking you a few things. Of course, you will be the voice of manufacturers. We need to know what exactly is being said on ground. What do manufacturers think about this? Of course, right now we are at 7.6%, 7.8% of the gross domestic product. The aim is 20% by 2030 and 15% by 2027, which is about 2 years away from now. So quite ambitious, considering all these taxes. We need to know what is happening. And of course, we have Hon Billow Kerrow, who is going to be acting as our industry expert. We need to know what exactly is happening on this front. Some of the implications may be good, some may be bad. We just need to know what is this math for a lot of Kenyans. Now, I'll start with you, Anthony. Of course, a lot of things need to be discussed, but there is the repeal of the relief on excise duty on raw materials. These are just suggestions right now. Of course, there's still a lot of public participation. We did see that some of the people who are giving their opinions on public participation forums in different counties are saying that they don't feel very heard. This repeal, what exactly would that mean for manufacturers?
So, and thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being
happy to be here for the first time.
Fantastic.
I think it's good to step back a bit and look at what is the value of manufacturing value addition, so that then you know at which point do you create value and where do you then impose the tax, right? So we operate within EAC, Common External Tariff Book, Custom Union, Common Custom Union. We operate within COMESA. We operate within Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And every time you add levies, fees, excise, VAT on raw materials, you make it much more difficult to compete when you add value.
Right.
We have no problem because we can see the numbers. The government is pushing for physical consolidation, and they have very few choices to be able to finance the budget of about 3.9 trillion.
Right.
And looking at raising about 2.9 trillion ordinary revenue, they need to tax. So we have no contestation about that. The philosophy that we try to put across is that we have a EAC philosophy, which you call four-band structure.
Right.
And we would want, and we spend a lot of time talking about this, would want the government to pull that through, use the same science that all the 7 countries within EAC are using, that push the taxes to the finished goods as opposed to raw materials.
Right.
Because once you bring the raw materials, you are able to produce competitively. And I think at this time, I'll just leave it there before we go to the specifics.
Right. And the specifics we will go into, because you've said a few things that are very, very important to consider. The Export Investment Promotion Levy might be introduced. Now, this, of course, is raising a lot of hackles. And you have said that taxing raw materials is not the way to go, because that does not promote industrialization. Right. Honorable Billow, I will just come to you now. Maybe if you could just explain to us, of course, the government wants to push taxation to GDP from around 16% to 22%. Do you believe that this is the right move to be taking?
Thank you very much. Like Mwangi, the first time it's beautiful.
It's quite the studio.
Yes.
I think people are usually very shocked about the opulence of TV47, your home of untold stories.
Yeah, you are living large.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Government does not find out they'll start taxing you.
Oh, please don't say that. Please don't say that.
They will. They come here and they say, how much are you paying?
And there were the roaming KRA agents.
Yeah.
So
I think Mwangi has said it all. You see what's happening is, I believe this finance bill, like the one of 2023,
right,
is punitive. Really, some of the tax measures are quite punitive. They are retrogressive, some of them, and some of them, to be frank, is just dumb. They don't make any sense, absolutely.
Right.
And so the concern is, yes, the government says we want to raise the tax to GDP from 14 to 22.
Right.
But those are two numbers. They're based on two numbers. They said numerator and denominator.
Right.
If you just focus on the numerator, you want to know why, what happens to the denominator. Let me tell you, I like saying this all the time.
Right.
Just before President Uhuru rebased the GDP in his second term, we were at 19%, that ratio. Then he expands the GDP by 30, 25 and 5, 30%.
Right.
And so once you you expand the GDP, because of course you remember Uhuru wanted to feel that we are one of the richest in Africa.
Right.
And so what happens is the ratio goes down. You'll be shocked if you look at the ratios during the time of Moi. They were 22, sometimes 20. So it's not really to suggest that if we raise our ratio to 22, we're going to make Kenyans happy. We're going to make Kenyans rich. The government will have so much. That's completely misleading.
Right.
The richest country in the world, US, their tax to GDP ratio is 27%.
Right.
This is a country that is one of the poorest countries in third world, a third world country that's poor. We have 80% of our people are living on subsistence economy, informal sector. They're living hand to mouth. America's informal sector is 3%. But with that, they can only collect up to 27%.
Right.
There's a limit to what you can collect. So I think the government seems to ignore the elephant in the room is not about revenue. Kenyans are paying more tax than revenue. We collect more tax revenue than almost all this region, all these East African countries combined. So our issue is not been revenue. Our issue is really on expenditure. We're living large. We are managing our funds. But we don't want to focus on that, so we introduce taxes which I believe are punitive, and you will see when we go into detail, some of them are really, don't make sense at all.
Right. Honorable Billow, maybe if I could just take you back a little bit. The previous finance bill and now act for 2023-2024 largely focused on increasing the tax base, especially from employees, and a lot of people are saying income earners were the people who were targeted for that particular finance bill. Now people would say that it's shifted to manufacturers. Now, the people who consume the goods from manufacturers are the same people who are heavily taxed on the previous Finance Act.
Yeah.
Would you say then that this would be a recipe for disaster?
I think so. Quite obvious. And by the way, last year it was not only the employees, the industry was also affected significantly.
Right.
Oh yes, quite a number, particularly in the construction industry and many other. So are affected by that EIPL when it was introduced to 17%.
Right.
He'll tell you. Yes, I think so. So this thing is really, what does the government want to do? The government says our target is we want to grow the economy. We want to get jobs for people. Right. We want to reduce the cost of living. We want to increase manufacturing. So you need to test the finance bill against those targets of the government.
Right.
Is it going to achieve any of these things? It won't. Manufacturing, we look at it, it won't, obviously.
Right.
And by the way, the economic survey report just released this week. Manufacturing is one of those, and that has gone down. So, and he'll tell you, it's like the last year's Finance Act partly contributed to that, and they've been warned. I mean, every time the government comes up with this thing, we tell them, look, if you do this, this is going to be the impact. Some of those impacts are maybe unintended consequences, but some of them nobody bothered to look at it, that this is going to be the impact. So one, it's going to make the issue of cost of living worse, because everything that you put tax on, I'll pass on to the consumer.
Right.
So you're now taxing financial services, you're increasing taxes in financial services, on communication, on manufacturing, on literally every sector. So you're going to raise the cost of finance, you're going to increase the cost of labor, you increase the cost of goods because you have taxed the manufacturers. So where does that take Kenyans? You're going to make the situation worse.
All right. Now, of course, your sentiments are they're being, doubled or even seconded by a lot of people. Let's take a look at what the analysts have to say. And some analysts have even said that this is a preposterous proposition. Let's take a look. All right, as we prepare that, I'll focus on our manufacturer. Now, a lot of things are going to be changing, and I love the fact that the Kenya Association of Manufacturers was very practical on how many items are going to be taxed. One of the things that will be heavily impacted, of course, the environment is very important to a lot of people, but there is the eco-levy. Now, Anthony, I want you to tell us a little bit about that particular levy.
So, it is, if you look at first the whole bill, and Mheshimiwa has said, you struggle to see the theory of change. What exactly are we trying to achieve? Is it just about looking around and saying, let's collect from here, let's collect? How do we grow the cake so that the government can get more?
Right.
There is no golden thread you can look at that bill and say, this is a strategy that we are taking.
Right.
If you look at the eco-levy, eco-levy has a nice, label nomenclature.
Right.
It's about environment. And of course, when you talk about environment, people become emotional.
Right.
But you also have to ask yourself, if this is to sort out to mitigate against the effects on environment, when they banned, they attempted, or the government came and said, we want to ban plastic packaging.
Right.
Kenya Association of Manufacturers came and worked very closely with government to come up with what we call extended producer responsibility. And we created institutions that we incubated ourselves to look at all these things that would be harmful to the environment.
Right.
And we created institutions that are registered. We incubated them, which are called PRO, Producer Responsibility Organizations. We have KEPRO, we have PACPRO, we have others. And we are actually, as manufacturers, funding them. Now, while we are doing this, you introduce an eco-levy, which is now a double taxation, ostensibly to mitigate against economic, the environment.
Right.
So this has nothing to do with the environment. This is just an ordinary tax,
right,
just like the export levy that you have pointed out.
Right.
It is a tax on imported raw materials, but it is couched as
right,
an export promotion levy.
Right.
It doesn't promote any export. It is just importing, levying the import of raw materials. Now, let me give you a practical example. When you're doing some of these packaging materials.
So you know that, for example,
Just continue.
When you're importing the raw materials to make packaging material, some of them, they go for 50 cents of $1
right,
or $1 per kilo. This levy is 150 shillings per kilo.
Right.
More expensive than the raw material. What does that tell you? That the packaging will go up by over 100%.
Right.
So all the goods that we consume have packaging. And packaging is actually very expensive.
Right. Especially, consumer goods.
All of them. So what does that mean? But then there's also this fallacy, and sometimes the policymakers don't get it, that when you actually put any levy, you are taxing the ordinary mwananchi,
right,
we call wajiko.
Right.
All of them. All that bill, 137 pages, it is targeted at the mwananchi.
Right.
Because manufacturers, what they do is to load that cost into the product. So we shouldn't even be looking at,
at the end of the day.
At the end of the day,
consumer.
it's a consumer. Our worry, and they can even put eco-levy 100%, 1,000%.
Right.
But our worry is that then you depress the demand because the products are not affordable.
All right.
And when you do that, remember I told you that we operate within a EAC environment.
Right.
Some of the things that we used to export to EAC countries, we're now importing. I'll give you an example.
Right.
Look at last year, the Finance Act 2023 introduced 10% export levy on packaging, on paper.
Right.
That is used to make raw material for making packaging materials.
Right.
What we were exporting, what we were making here from 1948, one of the company started in 1948, East African Packaging. They closed last month.
Right.
They were the ones who were making paper for tea, packaging tea, all the KTDA factories. But now we're importing that paper from Sri Lanka.
Wow.
You can see by just introducing 10%, you wipe out the entire packaging.
Right.
And companies close shop.
Right.
Others relocate. We were exporting a lot of these packaging materials to Uganda and Tanzania and Rwanda. Now we are importing from them.
Right. So what exactly is happening? And manufacturers must be speaking about this. And we will be touching on that. But we need to take a short breather because things are getting quite fiery here. Let's go for a very short break. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.